In the bitter cold of January 1911, when surveyor James Whitmore drove his measuring stakes into the frozen Kentucky soil along the disputed property line between the old Crenshaw farm and the adjacent Hensley tract, his shovel struck something that would forever change how the residents of Harlan County viewed their most respected religious family. What emerged from that frost-hardened earth was not the expected tangle of roots or buried stones, but the skeletal remains of what appeared to be a young child, clutching a tattered cloth doll that had somehow survived 18 years beneath the ground. Before we descend into this chilling investigation of one of Kentucky's most heinous family operations, this story isn't for everyone. Only those brave enough to confront the darkest chapters of American history should continue. If you're ready to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to let these stories remain buried, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. We're building a global network of people who believe these victims deserve to have their stories told. The discovery that January morning would ultimately reveal the systematic murder of 24 innocent people over an 18-year period, carried out by a family whose patriarch had delivered Sunday sermons about Christian charity and divine mercy to packed congregations every week. Between 1892 and 1910, Ezekiel Crenshaw and his family members had perfected a method of operation so calculated and ruthless that it would make even hardened investigators question their faith in human decency. What the authorities tried to bury for decades, what the local newspapers refused to print in full detail, and what the surviving court records only hint at through carefully sanitized language, can no longer remain hidden in the shadows of Kentucky's rolling hills. The Crenshaw family had turned their remote farm into a killing ground, using the very foundations of community trust, religious authority, and Southern hospitality as weapons against the most vulnerable members of society. Ezekiel Crenshaw had arrived in Harlan County in 1889, a tall, imposing man with piercing blue eyes and a voice that could fill a church without effort. He claimed to have received his calling to minister while traveling through the Cumberland Mountains, though no records exist of his ordination or previous congregations. What mattered to the hardscrabble farming community was that he could read scripture with conviction and seemed genuinely committed to establishing a proper church in their isolated valley. The land he purchased sat at the convergence of 3 mountain roads, making it a natural stopping point for travelers seeking shelter or supplies. The main farmhouse, a substantial 2-story structure that Ezekiel claimed to have inherited from a deceased uncle, commanded a view of all approaching routes while remaining hidden from casual observation by a dense grove of ancient oak trees. Local residents considered this privacy a sign of modesty rather than recognizing it as the strategic advantage it truly represented. Mercy Crenshaw, Ezekiel's wife, had established herself as the valley's unofficial midwife and healer within months of their arrival. Her knowledge of herbal remedies and apparent medical training made her invaluable to families who lived hours away from the nearest doctor. What nobody questioned was where she had acquired such extensive knowledge of anatomy, surgical procedures, and the precise methods for preserving organic materials. Her gentle manner with expectant mothers and sick children earned her a reputation for compassion that would later serve as the perfect cover for activities that defied comprehension. The Crenshaw children seemed to embody everything the community valued in young people. Benjamin, the eldest son, demonstrated exceptional skill in carpentry and construction, often volunteering his services for church repairs and barn raisings. The twin daughters, Sarah and Ruth, were praised for their quiet obedience and dedication to helping their mother with her medical work. Neighbors frequently commented on how well-mannered and respectful all the Crenshaw children appeared, never suspecting that this perfect behavior masked a systematic indoctrination into practices that would horrify civilized society. By 1892, 3 years after their arrival, the Crenshaw family had become pillars of the community. Ezekiel's sermons drew congregations from surrounding counties, Mercy's medical services were sought by families throughout the region, and their farm was known as a place where travelers could count on receiving food, shelter, and Christian fellowship. The carefully constructed facade of respectability and religious devotion provided the perfect environment for what investigators would later discover was a sophisticated operation designed to identify, isolate, and eliminate vulnerable individuals. The first documented disappearance occurred in September 1892, though it would be nearly 2 decades before anyone connected it to the Crenshaw family. Thomas and Martha Henley, along with their 8-year-old daughter Emma, had been traveling south from Ohio seeking work in the coal mines that were beginning to open throughout the region. Local residents remembered them stopping at the Crenshaw farm for directions and supplies, but nobody questioned their failure to appear at any of the mining camps or neighboring towns. What made the Henley disappearance particularly tragic was how perfectly they fit the pattern that the Crenshaw family would refine over the following 18 years. They were strangers to the area with no local connections who might come looking for them. They carried their life savings in cash, as was common for families relocating in search of work. Most importantly, they were desperately vulnerable, dependent on the kindness of strangers in an unfamiliar and often hostile environment. The method of operation that began with the Henley family would be repeated with chilling consistency over the years that followed. Travelers would arrive at the Crenshaw farm seeking directions, supplies, or temporary shelter. Ezekiel would assess their situation with the practiced eye of a predator, determining whether they had connections in the area, how much money they carried, and most crucially, how long they could disappear before anyone would come looking for them. Those who passed his deadly evaluation would be invited to stay for a few days, to rest and recover from their journey while enjoying the hospitality of a Christian family. During their stay, Mercy would conduct what she described as a routine medical examination to ensure they were healthy enough to continue their travels. This examination served multiple purposes beyond the obvious one of determining their physical condition. It allowed her to catalogue any valuable items they carried, assess their overall health and usefulness, and most importantly, to administer substances that would gradually weaken their ability to resist or escape when the family's true intentions became clear. The winter of 1889 had been particularly harsh in Harlan County, with snow blocking the mountain passes for weeks at a time and leaving many families isolated and desperate for supplies. It was during this season of hardship that Ezekiel Crenshaw first appeared in the valley, driving a heavily loaded wagon through weather that had defeated more experienced travelers. Local residents would later recall how impressed they were by his apparent fearlessness in the face of dangerous conditions, never suspecting that his willingness to travel treacherous roads stemmed from experience gained through far more sinister journeys. The story Ezekiel told about his background was carefully crafted to inspire trust while revealing nothing that could be verified. He claimed to have been called to ministry after losing his first wife and infant son to fever while living in Virginia, a tragedy that supposedly drove him to dedicate his life to serving God and helping others avoid similar suffering. This narrative of personal loss and spiritual awakening resonated deeply with a community that had endured its own share of hardship and tragedy. What made Ezekiel's story particularly compelling was how he wove specific details throughout his account while avoiding any information that listeners could independently confirm. He spoke movingly about his deceased wife's love for children and her dream of starting a school, explaining why he felt called to help families in need. He described his late son's fascination with carpentry and building, which he claimed inspired his own interest in construction projects that would benefit the community. Mercy's arrival 6 months later seemed to validate Ezekiel's story about finding new love and purpose after devastating loss. She appeared to be exactly what the community needed, a woman with genuine medical training who could serve the valley's scattered families as both midwife and general healer. Her soft-spoken manner and apparent devotion to her new husband created an image of domestic harmony that impressed neighbors who had grown accustomed to the rough, often violent relationships that characterized frontier life. The medical supplies and equipment that Mercy brought with her were far more extensive than anyone might have expected from a frontier healer. Her collection included surgical instruments, bottles of preserved specimens, and detailed anatomical drawings that suggested formal medical training. When questioned about her background, she claimed to have learned her skills from a doctor in Tennessee who had trained her as his assistant after her own parents died in a cholera outbreak. What truly established the Crenshaw family's reputation in the community was their immediate willingness to help during the influenza outbreak that struck the valley in the spring of 1890. While other families barricaded themselves in their homes to avoid contagion, Ezekiel and Mercy moved freely between the affected households, providing nursing care and spiritual comfort to the dying. Their apparent immunity to the disease, which they attributed to divine protection, only enhanced their reputation for being specially blessed by God. The children who joined the family over the next 2 years seemed to confirm this image of divine favor. Benjamin arrived first, introduced as Ezekiel's nephew whose parents had died in a mining accident in West Virginia. The boy's advanced skills in carpentry and his respectful demeanor impressed everyone who met him. Sarah and Ruth appeared the following year, identified as orphan sisters whose dying grandmother had entrusted them to the Crenshaw family's care. Nobody questioned the rapid expansion of the Crenshaw household because frontier families frequently took in relatives and orphans out of necessity and Christian duty. What observers failed to notice was how quickly and completely these children adapted to their new roles, displaying none of the grief or adjustment difficulties that might be expected from youngsters who had recently lost their families. Their seamless integration into the household suggested a level of preparation and indoctrination that would have been impossible to achieve in the timeframe described. The construction projects that Benjamin undertook around the Crenshaw property were viewed by neighbors as examples of industrious family cooperation. The boy's ability to work independently on complex building tasks impressed local men who struggled to find reliable help for their own construction needs. What they didn't realize was that many of Benjamin's projects involved creating hidden spaces, reinforced storage areas, and discrete disposal systems that would later serve the family's murderous operations. The location Ezekiel had chosen for the family farm provided advantages that wouldn't become apparent until investigators began reconstructing the crime scenes decades later. The property sat at the intersection of 3 different county jurisdictions, creating confusion about which sheriff's department held responsibility for investigating any incidents that might occur there. The dense forest surrounding the farmhouse provided natural concealment while the multiple access roads allowed for discreet movement of people and materials. By 1891, just 2 years after their arrival, the Crenshaw family had achieved a level of community integration that would have taken most newcomers a decade to accomplish. Ezekiel's sermons were drawing larger crowds than the valley had ever seen, Mercy's medical services were in constant demand, and their children were held up as examples of proper Christian upbringing. This reputation for respectability and religious devotion would prove to be their most effective weapon in the systematic campaign of murder that was about to begin. The autumn of 1892 brought an early frost to the Kentucky mountains, forcing many travelers to seek shelter earlier than usual during their journeys. It was on October 15 of that year that Thomas Henley made the fateful decision to approach the Crenshaw farm after his family's wagon wheel cracked on the Rocky Mountain Road just 2 miles from their property. What should have been a simple request for assistance and perhaps a night's lodging would instead become the first documented case in what investigators would later recognize as one of the most systematic killing sprees in American history. Thomas Henley was exactly the type of victim that the Crenshaw family would target repeatedly over the following 18 years. At 34 years old, he was traveling with his wife Martha and their 8-year-old daughter Emma from Ohio to the coal mining regions of eastern Kentucky, carrying their life savings of $230 in cash sewn into Martha's traveling dress. They had no relatives or connections in the area, no predetermined destination beyond finding work in the mines, and no schedule that would cause concern if they failed to arrive anywhere by a specific date. When Thomas knocked on the Crenshaw farmhouse door that October evening, Ezekiel greeted him with the warm hospitality that had already made the family famous throughout the valley. He immediately offered to examine the damaged wagon wheel and suggested that the family stay for several days while Benjamin fabricated a proper replacement. This generosity seemed entirely consistent with the Christian charity that the Crenshaws had demonstrated since their arrival, though it served a far more sinister purpose than Thomas could have imagined. The first night proceeded exactly as any guest might expect when staying with a respected religious family. Ezekiel led evening prayers that included heartfelt thanksgiving for bringing the travelers safely to their door, while Mercy prepared a substantial meal and fussed over young Emma with the attention of a devoted grandmother. The Henley family retired to the guest room feeling grateful for their good fortune in encountering such genuinely charitable people during their time of need. What the Henleys couldn't have known was that their every movement was being carefully observed and evaluated by their hosts. Ezekiel had already conducted a thorough assessment of their financial resources by examining their wagon and belongings while supposedly inspecting the damaged wheel. Mercy had engaged Martha in seemingly innocent conversation that revealed crucial details about their travel plans, family connections, and the exact amount of money they carried. Even the children had been assigned roles in gathering intelligence, with Sarah and Ruth entertaining Emma while subtly questioning her about relatives and destinations. The second day introduced the medical examination that would become a standard element of the Crenshaw family's operation. Mercy explained to Martha that she routinely examined all travelers who stayed with them to ensure they weren't carrying any contagious diseases that might spread to the local community. This precaution seemed entirely reasonable given the recent influenza outbreak, and Martha readily agreed to submit herself and her family to what appeared to be a thorough but professional medical assessment. During these examinations, Mercy administered what she described as preventive treatments designed to protect the travelers from diseases common in the mining regions they were heading toward. These treatments, delivered through herbal teas and topical preparations, actually contained carefully measured doses of substances that would gradually weaken the victims' physical strength while making them increasingly dependent on their hosts' continued care and assistance. By the third day, all three members of the Henley family were experiencing symptoms that Mercy diagnosed as a mild fever brought on by exhaustion from their long journey. She prescribed bed rest and continued treatments while Benjamin worked on repairing their wagon wheel with what appeared to be meticulous attention to detail. The delay seemed unfortunate but hardly suspicious, especially given the obvious care and concern that the Crenshaw family demonstrated for their guests' well-being. What Thomas and Martha failed to recognize was that their gradual physical deterioration was entirely intentional, designed to eliminate any possibility of resistance or escape when the family's true intentions became clear. The substances Mercy had been administering were carefully chosen to produce weakness and confusion while avoiding any symptoms that might alert the victims to deliberate poisoning. Her medical knowledge allowed her to precisely control the timing and severity of their incapacitation. The fourth night marked the beginning of the end for the Henley family. As Thomas lay weakened by fever and barely conscious, Ezekiel entered their room carrying a pillow and speaking in the same gentle tone he used when delivering Sunday sermons about God's mercy. He explained to the terrified Martha that her family's suffering was about to end, that they would be reunited in heaven, and that their deaths would serve a greater purpose in God's plan for the Crenshaw family's mission. Martha's screams were muffled by the isolated location of the farmhouse and the thick walls that Benjamin had reinforced during his construction projects. Her desperate attempts to protect her daughter Emma were futile against opponents who had planned every detail of this moment with methodical precision. The murders were carried out with clinical efficiency, leaving no evidence of struggle that might later raise questions about the family's disappearance. The disposal of the bodies demonstrated the same careful planning that had characterized every aspect of the operation. Benjamin had prepared specific locations on the property where remains could be buried deeply enough to avoid detection while remaining accessible for future reference. The personal belongings were sorted and catalogued, with valuable items set aside for later sale and distinctive objects destroyed to eliminate any possibility of identification. Within a week of their arrival, all trace of the Henley family had been eliminated except for the carefully maintained records that Mercy kept in a leather-bound ledger hidden beneath the floorboards of the farmhouse. These records would eventually prove to be the most damning evidence against the family, documenting not only the murders but also the systematic nature of their operations and the calculated manner in which they selected and processed their victims. The success of their first operation emboldened the Crenshaw family to refine their methods with the precision of craftsmen perfecting their trade. Throughout the winter of 1892 and into the spring of 1893, they analyzed every aspect of the Henley murders, identifying weaknesses in their procedures and developing improvements that would make future operations more efficient and less likely to attract unwanted attention from local authorities or suspicious neighbors. Mercy's medical expertise proved invaluable in developing a more sophisticated approach to victim incapacitation. She began experimenting with different combinations of plant-based toxins and pharmaceutical preparations, seeking the perfect balance between effectiveness and subtlety. Her goal was to create a system that would render victims helpless while maintaining the appearance of natural illness, eliminating any possibility that a surviving victim might later describe symptoms consistent with deliberate poisoning. The hidden ledger that Mercy maintained became increasingly detailed as she documented the effects of various treatments on different types of victims. She recorded precise measurements, timing intervals, and physiological responses with the methodical approach of a trained researcher. These records would later reveal the disturbing extent to which she viewed her victims as experimental subjects rather than human beings deserving of mercy or compassion. Benjamin's construction projects during this period focused on creating more sophisticated infrastructure to support the family's murderous activities. He excavated a series of interconnected cellars beneath the farmhouse, accessible through concealed entrances that appeared to be nothing more than root storage areas. These underground chambers served multiple purposes, providing secure holding areas for victims who were too weak to escape but not yet ready for elimination, storage space for valuable items taken from the dead, and work areas where bodies could be processed without risk of discovery. The most chilling aspect of Benjamin's improvements was the construction of what he referred to in his private notes as the preparation room. This underground chamber contained a drainage system that allowed for the systematic dismemberment and disposal of corpses, along with specialized tools and equipment designed to extract maximum value from each victim. The room's design reflected a level of planning and foresight that demonstrated how completely the young man had embraced his role in the family's operations. Sarah and Ruth, despite their youth, proved to be exceptionally talented at identifying and evaluating potential victims. Their innocent appearance and childlike charm made them perfect agents for gathering intelligence about travelers passing through the area. They would approach strangers at the general store or church gatherings, engaging them in seemingly innocent conversations that revealed crucial details about their backgrounds, destinations, and vulnerability to the family's predatory schemes. The twins developed an informal rating system for potential victims based on factors such as their apparent wealth, likelihood of being missed if they disappeared, and physical condition that might affect their usefulness to the family's operations. This systematic approach to victim selection would later be recognized by investigators as evidence of the calculated nature of the Crenshaw crimes, demonstrating that these were not impulsive acts of violence but carefully planned executions designed to maximize profit while minimizing risk. By the summer of 1893, the family had established criteria that would guide their victim selection for the remainder of their criminal career. Ideal targets were traveling alone or in small family groups, carrying substantial amounts of cash or valuable possessions, with no fixed destination or timeline that would trigger immediate searches if they failed to arrive somewhere. They particularly favored individuals who appeared to be fleeing from legal troubles or family disputes, as such people were even less likely to be missed by law enforcement or relatives. The second documented victims were Jacob and Elizabeth Morrison, an elderly couple traveling from Tennessee to visit relatives in Virginia. They arrived at the Crenshaw farm in August 1893, seeking directions and fresh water for their horses. The couple fit the family's newly established profile perfectly. They were traveling with their life savings, had no specific schedule to maintain, and had already been on the road for 2 weeks without contacting anyone about their progress. The Morrison murders demonstrated the refinements the family had made to their operational procedures. Instead of the 4-day process used with the Henley family, the Morrisons were eliminated within 48 hours using Mercy's improved poisoning techniques. The elderly couple's physical frailty made them more susceptible to the toxic preparations, allowing for a more rapid progression from initial incapacitation to final elimination. What made the Morrison case particularly significant was how the family began to systematically exploit their victims' resources beyond simple theft. Jacob Morrison had been carrying detailed maps of mountain passes and trade routes, information that Ezekiel recognized as valuable to other travelers and potential criminal associates. Elizabeth Morrison's collection of family jewelry provided the first opportunity for the family to test methods of disposing of stolen goods through networks of corrupt traders and fence operations. The disposal of the Morrison bodies introduced another innovation that would become standard practice for the family. Rather than simply burying the remains in unmarked graves, Benjamin began experimenting with lime treatments and other methods designed to accelerate decomposition while eliminating evidence that might later be used to establish identity or cause of death. This systematic approach to evidence destruction demonstrated a level of criminal sophistication that was remarkably advanced for the time period. The profits from the Morrison murders allowed the family to make significant improvements to their property and equipment. They purchased additional medical supplies for Merce's operations, expanded Benjamin's workshop to accommodate more sophisticated construction projects, and acquired horses and wagons that would facilitate future body disposal operations. These investments were carefully disguised as the fruits of successful farming and Ezekiel's growing reputation as a preacher, maintaining the facade of legitimate prosperity. By the end of 1893, the Crenshaw family had transformed from opportunistic killers into a sophisticated criminal organization with clearly defined roles, established procedures, and long-term strategic planning. Their success in eliminating two entire families without attracting any suspicion from local authorities had given them the confidence to expand their operations and begin actively seeking out victims rather than simply waiting for opportunities to present themselves at their doorstep. The years between 1897 and 1902 marked the height of the Crenshaw family's murderous operations, a period when their confidence had grown to such proportions that they began actively hunting for victims rather than simply waiting for opportunities to arrive at their doorstep. During these 5 years, they would claim the lives of 14 people, representing more than half of their total victim count and demonstrating a level of operational efficiency that would have impressed military strategists. If this story is giving you chills about how a family could operate with such calculated evil for so long, share this video with someone who appreciates dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our efforts to bring these forgotten stories to light, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss investigations like this. We're building a community of people who believe these victims deserve to have their stories remembered. The expansion of their operations began with Ezekiel's development of a network of criminal associates throughout the region. His position as a respected preacher provided perfect cover for extensive travel, allowing him to establish relationships with corrupt officials, dishonest merchants, and other individuals who could facilitate the family's activities. These connections proved invaluable for disposing of stolen goods, obtaining information about potential victims, and ensuring that any investigations into missing persons would be quietly discouraged or misdirected. Sheriff William Dockery of Harlan County became the family's most valuable ally during this period, though the full extent of his complicity wouldn't be discovered until after his death in 1908. Dockery had accumulated substantial gambling debts in Lexington and desperately needed additional income to maintain his position and reputation. The arrangement he reached with Ezekiel was elegantly simple. In exchange for regular payments and a share of valuable items taken from victims, he would ensure that missing person reports were handled with minimal investigation and maximum bureaucratic delay. The relationship with Dockery allowed the family to operate with unprecedented boldness. They began targeting victims in neighboring counties, confident that any investigations would be hampered by jurisdictional disputes and communication failures between different law enforcement agencies. This expansion also enabled them to avoid creating patterns that might alert observant local residents to the unusual number of travelers who seemed to disappear after visiting the Crenshaw farm. Merce's medical skills had evolved to the point where she could incapacitate victims with remarkable precision, adjusting her preparations based on factors such as age, physical condition, and estimated body weight. Her ledger from this period contains detailed notes about optimal dosages for different victim profiles, along with observations about which combinations of substances produce the most useful results. The clinical detachment evident in these records demonstrates how completely she had dehumanized her victims. The most profitable operation during this peak period occurred in September 1899, when the family targeted a group of 3 families traveling together from Ohio to the Arkansas Territory. The group consisted of 12 people ranging in age from 6 months to 67 years, carrying combined savings of over $800 along with livestock, farming equipment, and household goods worth an additional $300. The logistics of eliminating 12 victims simultaneously required careful planning and coordination that showcased the family's operational sophistication. Benjamin had constructed a large holding area beneath the barn specifically designed to accommodate multiple captives, while Sarah and Ruth had perfected techniques for separating children from their parents during the initial hospitality phase. The entire operation was completed within 6 days, with all evidence of the victim's presence systematically eliminated. What made this mass murder particularly significant was how it demonstrated the family's ability to process multiple victims efficiently while maintaining their cover story of Christian hospitality. Neighbors who visited during this period noticed nothing unusual beyond the apparent prosperity that seemed to follow the Crenshaw family in all their endeavors. The carefully maintained facade of religious devotion and community service continued to provide perfect camouflage for activities that defied comprehension. The disposal of 12 bodies presented logistical challenges that led to important innovations in the family's operational procedures. Benjamin developed a systematic approach to dismemberment and burial that maximized the use of available space while minimizing the risk of discovery. The process involved treating remains with lime and other chemicals to accelerate decomposition, then burying different body parts in various locations across their extensive property. The profits from this operation enabled the family to purchase additional land adjacent to their original farm, ostensibly to expand their agricultural activities but actually to provide more secure areas for body disposal and evidence destruction. They also invested in improved transportation, acquiring a specially modified wagon with hidden compartments that could be used to transport victims or remains without detection. During this period, the family began maintaining detailed financial records that tracked their income from various sources. These documents, discovered decades later during the investigation, revealed that murder had become their primary source of revenue, generating far more income than farming, preaching, or Mercy's medical services. The systematic nature of these records demonstrated how completely they had transformed killing into a business enterprise. The success of their operations during this peak period bred a dangerous overconfidence that would eventually contribute to their downfall. They began taking risks that previous years of caution would have prevented, targeting victims with stronger community connections and maintaining less careful control over evidence disposal. The wealth they had accumulated made them prominent figures in the local community, attracting attention that would prove problematic when suspicions finally began to emerge. By 1902, the Crenshaw family had perfected a criminal enterprise that combined religious authority, medical expertise, construction skills, and strategic corruption to create what investigators would later describe as one of the most efficient killing operations in American criminal history. Their success had transformed them from desperate frontier criminals into wealthy, respected community leaders whose true nature remained hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed deception. The autumn of 1903 brought the first serious threat to the Crenshaw family's operations when Margaret Whitfield, a schoolteacher from the neighboring valley, began asking uncomfortable questions about the unusual number of travelers who seemed to disappear after visiting the area. Whitfield had been keeping informal records of the families and individuals she encountered during her monthly trips to the county seat, and she had noticed a disturbing pattern that local authorities had either missed or chosen to ignore. The danger posed by Whitfield's inquiries became apparent when she approached Sheriff Dockery with a list of 17 missing persons cases that she believed warranted investigation. Her methodical documentation included detailed descriptions of the missing individuals, their stated destinations, and the approximate dates when they had last been seen in the vicinity of the Crenshaw farm. This level of organization and persistence represented exactly the type of scrutiny that could unravel years of careful planning and execution. Ezekiel's response to this threat demonstrated the calculated ruthlessness that had enabled the family to operate undetected for over a decade. Rather than attempting to discourage Whitfield's investigation through intimidation or bribery, he chose to eliminate the threat permanently while maintaining the appearance of tragic accident. The plan he developed would require precise timing and coordination, but it offered the advantage of removing a dangerous witness while potentially discrediting her research in the process. The opportunity came in November 1903, when Whitfield made her regular monthly journey to Harlan Courthouse to review official records and file her reports with various government offices. The route she traveled required crossing Beaver Creek at a point where the bridge had been damaged by recent flooding, forcing travelers to use a temporary wooden structure that Benjamin had volunteered to construct as a community service project. Benjamin's construction of the temporary bridge had incorporated a subtle but fatal design flaw that could be activated remotely through a concealed mechanism hidden beneath the supporting framework. When Whitfield's horse and buggy reached the center span on the evening of November 18, Benjamin triggered the collapse from his concealed position in the nearby woods. The resulting accident appeared to be a tragic consequence of hasty construction and unfortunate timing rather than deliberate murder. The death of Margaret Whitfield effectively ended the most serious investigation the family had faced, but it also marked the beginning of a more cautious phase in their operations. Ezekiel recognized that their previous level of activity had created patterns that observant individuals could potentially detect, necessitating changes in their methods and target selection criteria. The family began implementing security measures designed to prevent future threats while maintaining their profitable criminal enterprise. The first major security enhancement involved the establishment of an early warning system that could alert them to approaching investigators or suspicious visitors. Sarah and Ruth were assigned to maintain regular contact with residents throughout the region, gathering intelligence about any unusual law enforcement activity or unexpected inquiries about missing persons. Their innocent appearance and established relationships made them ideal agents for this type of surveillance work. Merce's medical practice provided another layer of security through her access to confidential information about families throughout the area. Her position as a trusted healer allowed her to learn about travel plans, family disputes, and financial difficulties that might make certain individuals more suitable targets while identifying others who posed potential risks to the family's operations. This intelligence gathering became increasingly sophisticated as she developed techniques for extracting sensitive information during routine medical consultations. The family also began implementing more stringent victim selection criteria designed to minimize the risk of attracting unwanted attention. They established new rules requiring that potential targets have no connection to local families, no predetermined arrival dates at specific destinations, and no distinctive characteristics that might make their disappearance particularly memorable to casual observers. These restrictions significantly reduced the number of suitable victims but dramatically increased the safety of their operations. Benjamin's security innovations during this period included the construction of multiple escape routes from the farmhouse and surrounding buildings, along with hidden caches of supplies and money that could sustain the family if they were forced to flee quickly. He also developed a system for rapidly disposing of evidence, including specially prepared chemicals that could dissolve organic materials and mechanical devices that could destroy documents or other incriminating items within minutes. The most chilling security measure implemented during this period was the systematic elimination of potential witnesses who had survived previous encounters with the family. This campaign targeted individuals who had visited the Crenshaw farm during the early years of their operations but had left before becoming victims, either because they didn't meet the family's criteria or because circumstances had prevented their elimination at the time. The witness elimination program required extensive planning and coordination, as many of the targets had moved to distant locations and established new lives far from Harlan County. Ezekiel's network of criminal associates proved invaluable for tracking down these individuals and arranging their deaths in ways that appeared unrelated to their previous contact with the Crenshaw family. Between 1904 and 1906, 7 former visitors to the farm died under suspicious circumstances in locations ranging from Tennessee to Missouri. Despite these security measures, the family faced another serious threat in 1905 when Daniel Harmon, a traveling merchant who had narrowly escaped becoming a victim 3 years earlier, began sharing his suspicions about the Crenshaw family with other travelers and local officials. Harmon had been saved from elimination only by the unexpected arrival of a local minister who had come to discuss church business with Ezekiel, forcing the family to allow their intended victim to depart unharmed. The threat posed by Harmon was complicated by his wide-ranging travels and extensive network of contacts throughout the region. Unlike Margaret Whitfield, whose activities had been confined to a single county, Harmon's merchant activities brought him into contact with law enforcement officials, government administrators, and business leaders across multiple states. His accusations against the Crenshaw family carried additional weight because of his reputation for honesty and his detailed knowledge of frontier criminal activities. The solution to the Harmon problem required the family's most sophisticated operation to date, involving the coordination of criminal associates in 3 different states and the manipulation of existing feuds between rival merchant groups. The elaborate scheme culminated in Harmon's death during what appeared to be a robbery attempt, but which actually represented a carefully orchestrated assassination designed to silence a dangerous witness while discrediting his accusations against the Crenshaw family. The appointment of Sheriff Marcus Thornton to replace the deceased William Dockery in 1908 marked the beginning of the end for the Crenshaw family's reign of terror. Unlike his predecessor, Thornton had no gambling debts, no criminal associations, and no tolerance for the administrative negligence that had characterized law enforcement in Harlan County for the previous decade. His arrival represented exactly the type of honest, competent authority that the family had successfully avoided through careful corruption and strategic elimination of threats. Thornton's background as a former federal marshal and his experience investigating organized criminal enterprises made him uniquely qualified to recognize the patterns that previous officials had missed or deliberately ignored. Within weeks of taking office, he began reviewing the accumulated missing persons reports and unsolved cases that had been filed away without serious investigation. The systematic nature of these disappearances immediately attracted his attention and suspicion. What made Thornton particularly dangerous to the Crenshaw family was his understanding of how criminal organizations operated and his willingness to pursue investigations across county and state lines. He began corresponding with law enforcement agencies throughout the region, sharing information about missing persons cases and requesting details about similar patterns in their jurisdictions. This coordinated approach to investigation represented a level of professional competence that the family had never encountered. Take a moment to consider how many times throughout history, corrupt officials have enabled monsters to operate freely while innocent people suffered and died. This story raises uncomfortable questions about the systems we trust to protect us. Share your thoughts in the comments about how communities can better recognize and stop predators who hide behind respectable facades. Don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into America's hidden criminal history. The first breakthrough in Thornton's investigation came when he discovered the financial irregularities in Dockery's personal records following the former sheriff's death. The substantial unexplained deposits in Dockery's bank account, combined with his possession of jewelry and other valuable items that couldn't be accounted for through his official salary, suggested involvement in criminal activities that had been concealed from public scrutiny. Thornton's methodical approach to investigating these financial discrepancies led him to examine the sources of unusual wealth that had appeared throughout the county during Dockery's tenure. The Crenshaw family's remarkable prosperity attracted particular attention because their visible income from farming and religious activities seemed insufficient to support their obvious affluence and continuous property acquisitions. The new sheriff's investigation received unexpected assistance from Rebecca Hayes, a widow whose husband had disappeared while traveling through the area in 1906. Hayes had continued her own investigation into her husband's fate despite official discouragement, maintaining correspondence with other families who had lost relatives under similar circumstances. Her private network of concerned relatives had identified dozens of cases that shared common elements pointing towards systematic criminal activity. What made Hayes particularly valuable as a witness was her husband's survival training from his military service, which had enabled him to leave behind subtle signs of his passage that most travelers would never have considered. These markers, invisible to casual observers but meaningful to someone trained in tracking and reconnaissance, created a trail that led directly to the Crenshaw property before disappearing entirely. The collaboration between Thornton and Hayes represented a new type of threat that the Crenshaw family was ill-equipped to handle. Previous investigations had been conducted by single individuals who could be eliminated or corrupted through established methods, but this partnership involved multiple participants with different backgrounds and capabilities, making it much more difficult to neutralize through traditional approaches. Ezekiel's response to this growing threat demonstrated how the years of successful operations had affected his judgment and decision-making abilities. Instead of implementing the cautious defensive measures that had served the family well during previous crises, he chose to escalate the conflict through increasingly aggressive actions that only served to attract additional attention from law enforcement agencies. The first major mistake occurred when Benjamin attempted to intimidate Hayes by vandalizing her property and leaving threatening messages that referenced her deceased husband's fate. These actions, intended to discourage her investigation, instead convinced her that she was pursuing the right leads and encouraged her to intensify her cooperation with Thornton's official investigation. The family's second critical error involved their attempt to eliminate Thornton through the same methods that had proven effective against Margaret Whitfield and Daniel Harmon. However, the new sheriff's federal law enforcement background had made him suspicious of accident-prone infrastructure and potential ambush sites, leading him to vary his travel routes and maintain constant communication with colleagues about his whereabouts and activities. When Benjamin's carefully planned bridge collapse failed to eliminate Thornton due to the sheriff's last-minute decision to take an alternate route, the family found themselves in the unprecedented position of having attempted to murder a law enforcement official without achieving their objective. This failure not only left their most dangerous enemy alive but also provided him with concrete evidence of criminal intent and sophisticated planning. The botched assassination attempt prompted Thornton to request assistance from federal authorities, bringing resources and expertise that the Crenshaw family had never faced during their previous encounters with local law enforcement. The involvement of federal marshals with experience investigating interstate criminal organizations represented a qualitative change in the nature of the threat facing the family. The arrival of federal investigators also coincided with the emergence of additional witnesses who had previously been too frightened to come forward with information about suspicious activities around the Crenshaw farm. The combination of professional law enforcement protection and the obvious determination of the authorities to pursue the investigation regardless of local political considerations encouraged several key witnesses to share crucial evidence. Most significantly, the federal involvement enabled investigators to coordinate their efforts with law enforcement agencies in other states where Crenshaw family associates had been active. This broader perspective revealed the full scope of the criminal network that had enabled the family's operations, exposing corruption and complicity that extended far beyond the boundaries of Harlan County. The investigation's expansion into neighboring jurisdictions also uncovered physical evidence that had been preserved in locations where local authorities hadn't been compromised by criminal influence. Items that had been taken from victims and sold through the family's network of criminal associates were recovered and identified, providing concrete proof of the systematic nature of their operations and the calculated manner in which they had exploited their victims. The breakthrough that federal investigators had been seeking came from an unexpected source in March 1909, when 15-year-old Annie Fletcher approached Sheriff Thornton with information that would forever change the course of the investigation. Fletcher had worked as a domestic servant at the Crenshaw farm during the summer of 1907, helping Mercy with household duties and medical preparations during what the family described as an unusually busy period of treating sick travelers. What Fletcher had witnessed during her employment contradicted everything the community believed about the Crenshaw family's charitable activities. Instead of observing the compassionate care of ailing visitors, she had seen systematic poisoning, deliberate weakening of healthy individuals, and the careful preparation of substances designed to incapacitate rather than heal. Her testimony provided the first eyewitness account of the family's operational methods from someone who had survived the experience. Fletcher's survival had been purely accidental, the result of her youth and the family's assessment that eliminating a local girl with known relatives would create unacceptable risks to their operations. However, her presence during critical activities had given her access to information that no outside investigator could have obtained through conventional methods. Her detailed descriptions of the underground chambers, specialized equipment, and hidden storage areas provided investigators with specific targets for their searches. The most damaging aspect of Fletcher's testimony involved her description of Mercy's ledger and the systematic manner in which the family documented their crimes. She had observed Mercy making detailed entries about victim characteristics, treatment effectiveness, and disposal procedures, maintaining records with the precision of a medical researcher conducting experimental studies. This documentation represented potential evidence that could prove the systematic nature of the crimes beyond any reasonable doubt. Federal Marshal James Crawford, who had been assigned to lead the investigation, recognized that Fletcher's testimony provided the justification needed to obtain search warrants for the Crenshaw property. However, he also understood that the family's 18 years of successful operations had given them extensive experience in destroying evidence and concealing incriminating materials. The search would need to be conducted with extraordinary thoroughness and sophisticated techniques. The preparation for the search operation required weeks of careful planning to ensure that no evidence would be overlooked or destroyed during the process. Crawford assembled a team that included experienced federal investigators, forensic specialists from the Treasury Department, and local officials whose loyalty and competence had been verified through extensive background investigations. The operation would represent one of the most comprehensive criminal searches ever conducted in the region. The family's awareness of the impending search became apparent when Sarah and Ruth began making frequent trips to neighboring farms, ostensibly visiting friends but actually monitoring the movements of law enforcement personnel and gathering intelligence about the investigation's progress. Their surveillance activities demonstrated the sophisticated early warning systems that the family had developed over the years, but also revealed their growing desperation as the net began to close around them. Ezekiel's response to the mounting pressure showed signs of the psychological strain that years of maintaining dual identities had created. His Sunday sermons became increasingly erratic, featuring rambling discussions of divine justice and the persecution of righteous families by corrupt authorities. These public displays of instability attracted additional attention from investigators while undermining the carefully constructed image of respectability that had protected the family for so long. The actual search of the Crenshaw property began before dawn on April 12, 1909, with federal agents surrounding the farmhouse and outbuildings to prevent any escape or evidence destruction. The thoroughness of the operation surprised even experienced investigators, as Crawford's team employed innovative techniques for detecting hidden spaces and concealed storage areas that might contain incriminating materials. The discovery of Benjamin's underground chambers exceeded the investigators' most pessimistic expectations about the scope of the Crenshaw crimes. The sophisticated infrastructure revealed a level of planning and investment that could only have been justified by extensive criminal operations conducted over many years. The specialized equipment found in these chambers provided concrete evidence of systematic victim processing and body disposal activities. Most significantly, the investigators discovered Mercy's ledger exactly where Annie Fletcher had described, hidden beneath floorboards that had been carefully concealed but were no match for the systematic search techniques employed by Crawford's team. The detailed records contained in this document provided unprecedented insight into the family's operations, documenting 24 murders with clinical precision and revealing the calculated manner in which they had selected and eliminated their victims. The ledger entries demonstrated that the Crenshaw family had maintained meticulous records not only of their murders but also of their financial gains from each operation. The document revealed total profits of over $4,000 from their criminal activities, along with detailed inventories of valuable items taken from victims and sold through their network of criminal associates. This financial documentation provided clear evidence of the systematic nature of their crimes. Perhaps most disturbing were Mercy's experimental notes, which revealed that she had used her victims as test subjects for various poisoning techniques and medical procedures. Her clinical observations about the effectiveness of different toxins and treatment methods demonstrated a level of scientific detachment that horrified even hardened investigators. These records provided concrete evidence of deliberate torture and experimentation that elevated the crimes beyond simple murder. The search also uncovered correspondence between Ezekiel and his criminal associates throughout the region, revealing the extent of the corruption that had enabled the family's operations. Letters discussing the disposal of stolen goods, arrangements for eliminating witnesses, and payments to corrupt officials provided investigators with evidence of a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond the immediate family members. The physical evidence recovered from the property included personal belongings from numerous victims, carefully preserved items that could be used to establish the identities of people who had disappeared over the previous 18 years. Wedding rings, lockets, distinctive clothing, and other personal effects provided tangible connections between missing persons reports and the Crenshaw family's criminal activities. The most gruesome discoveries came from the examination of the burial sites that Benjamin had used for body disposal. The systematic nature of these graves, along with the chemical treatments used to accelerate decomposition, provided forensic evidence about the family's methods while confirming the scope of their crimes. The recovery of human remains from multiple locations across the property established definitively that the Crenshaw farm had been the site of numerous murders conducted over an extended period. The discovery of irrefutable evidence at the Crenshaw property triggered a desperate phase of the investigation as the family realized that their 18-year reign of terror was finally coming to an end. The systematic destruction of evidence that had protected them for so long was no longer sufficient to counter the overwhelming physical proof that federal investigators had uncovered, forcing them to resort to increasingly desperate measures that only served to confirm their guilt. Ezekiel's first response to the search results was an attempt to destroy the remaining evidence that investigators had not yet discovered, including additional burial sites and hidden caches of stolen goods scattered throughout their extensive property. However, the federal surveillance operation that Crawford had established made it impossible for the family to move freely without being observed, turning their own land into a prison that prevented them from completing their evidence destruction efforts. The most damaging blow to their cover-up attempts came when Benjamin's workshop was thoroughly examined, revealing the sophisticated tools and equipment he had used for victim processing and body disposal. The specialized saws, chemical treatments, and drainage systems found in the underground chambers provided concrete evidence of systematic murder operations that could not be explained through any legitimate activity. Mercer's attempt to claim that her medical ledger contained fictional research notes rather than actual victim records was quickly disproven when investigators matched specific entries to missing persons reports and recovered personal belongings. The clinical precision of her documentation, combined with the detailed financial records of profits from each operation, made it impossible to maintain that these were anything other than authentic records of systematic murder. The family's legal strategy, developed in consultation with a criminal defense attorney from Lexington, focused on attempting to shift blame onto their deceased Confederate Sheriff Dockery while portraying themselves as victims of his criminal conspiracy. This approach required them to admit to some level of involvement in illegal activities while claiming they had been coerced into participation through threats and intimidation. However, the extensive evidence of premeditation and sophisticated planning made it impossible to sustain claims of coercion or unwilling participation. The construction of specialized killing facilities, the development of systematic poisoning techniques, and the maintenance of detailed victim records all demonstrated a level of voluntary commitment to criminal activity that contradicted any assertion of reluctant involvement. The most significant challenge to the family's defense strategy came from the testimony of their own children, Sarah and Ruth, who were separately interrogated by federal investigators using techniques specifically designed to exploit the psychological stress of their situation. The twins' attempts to maintain coordinated stories began to break down under persistent questioning, revealing contradictions and inconsistencies that undermined the family's collective defense. Sarah's eventual confession provided investigators with insider details about the family's operations that corroborated and expanded upon the evidence already collected. Her description of victim selection criteria, operational procedures, and disposal methods confirmed the systematic nature of the crimes while revealing additional details about murders that had not been previously documented. The psychological pressure on Ruth proved even more devastating to the family's defense, as her breakdown during interrogation led to emotional testimony about the normalization of violence that had characterized her upbringing. Her descriptions of childhood experiences involving victim selection and body disposal provided disturbing insights into how the family had systematically indoctrinated their children into accepting murder as a normal family activity. Benjamin's response to the mounting evidence against his family demonstrated the complete breakdown of the psychological control mechanisms that had held their criminal organization together. His attempt to eliminate the other family members to prevent further testimony resulted in a violent confrontation that left Mercy severely injured and provided investigators with additional evidence of the family's willingness to resort to murder when threatened. The incident occurred during the early morning hours of May 15, 1909, when Benjamin attempted to poison his mother and sisters using the same techniques the family had employed against their victims. His plan was discovered by federal agents who were conducting overnight surveillance of the family's jail cells, leading to an intervention that saved the intended victims while providing concrete evidence of Benjamin's continued commitment to murder. Ezekiel's final attempt to escape justice involved an elaborate scheme to fake his own death while eliminating the key witnesses who could testify against him. The plan required coordination with remaining members of his criminal network and involved bribing guards, forging medical records, and arranging for a substitute body to be discovered in his cell. However, the federal investigation had already identified and neutralized most of his criminal associates, making it impossible to execute the escape plan successfully. The failure of the escape attempt resulted in additional charges against Ezekiel and provided investigators with evidence of an extensive criminal conspiracy that had enabled the family's operations for nearly 2 decades. The network of corrupt officials, dishonest merchants, and criminal associates that was exposed during this phase of the investigation revealed the true scope of the institutional failure that had allowed the murders to continue undetected for so long. The discovery of additional burial sites during this period, revealed through information extracted during Benjamin's interrogation, brought the confirmed victim count to 24 individuals whose remains were recovered from locations throughout the Crenshaw property. The systematic nature of these burial sites, combined with the chemical treatments used to accelerate decomposition, provided forensic evidence that supported the documentary evidence found in Mercy's ledger. The physical evidence of torture and experimentation found at these burial sites confirmed the most disturbing aspects of Mercy's medical notes, revealing that many victims had been subjected to prolonged suffering before their eventual deaths. The recovery of surgical instruments and medical equipment from the burial sites demonstrated that the family had used their victims as subjects for experimental procedures that served no purpose beyond satisfying their sadistic impulses. The final phase of evidence collection revealed the true financial scope of the Crenshaw operations, with investigators ultimately recovering stolen goods and money worth over $6,000 in total value. This substantial sum, accumulated over 18 years of systematic murder, provided concrete evidence of the profit motive that had driven the family's crimes while demonstrating the calculated nature of their victim selection and processing procedures. The mounting evidence made it clear that the Crenshaw family had operated one of the most sophisticated and profitable criminal enterprises in American history, combining religious authority, medical expertise, and construction skills to create a killing operation that had claimed 24 lives while generating substantial illegal profits. The systematic nature of their crimes and the institutional corruption that had enabled their operations would have lasting implications for law enforcement practices throughout the region. The compilation of evidence against the Crenshaw family required months of painstaking work as federal investigators sought to build an unassailable case that would ensure justice for the 24 documented victims while exposing the full scope of the criminal conspiracy that had enabled these murders. The sheer volume of physical evidence, documentary proof, and witness testimony created unprecedented challenges for a legal system that had never dealt with crimes of such systematic scope and calculated brutality. Federal Marshal Crawford's team worked tirelessly to establish definitive connections between each recovered set of remains and specific missing persons reports, using innovative forensic techniques that were considered revolutionary for the time period. The process involved detailed analysis of personal belongings, comparison of physical characteristics with family descriptions, and reconstruction of victim identities through methods that would later become standard practice in criminal investigations. The most compelling evidence emerged from the careful analysis of Merce's medical ledger, which provided a chronological record of murders that could be cross-referenced with missing persons reports and physical evidence recovered from burial sites. Her clinical documentation had inadvertently created the most comprehensive record of serial murder operations ever discovered by American law enforcement, providing prosecutors with irrefutable proof of premeditation and systematic criminal activity. What strikes me most about this case is how thoroughly the Crenshaw family documented their own crimes, as if they never believed they would face consequences for their actions. This level of arrogance and calculated evil challenges everything we want to believe about human nature. If you're finding this investigation as disturbing and fascinating as we are, hit that subscribe button and share this video with others who appreciate deep dives into America's forgotten criminal history. These victims deserve to have their stories remembered and their killers held accountable by history. The financial records discovered during the investigation revealed that the Crenshaw operations had generated profits equivalent to nearly $100,000 in modern currency, making it one of the most financially successful criminal enterprises of the era. This substantial income had enabled the family to purchase additional property, acquire sophisticated equipment, and maintain the facade of prosperity that had protected them from suspicion for 18 years. The investigation's expansion into neighboring states uncovered additional evidence of the criminal network that had supported the Crenshaw operations, including corrupt officials who had facilitated the disposal of stolen goods and elimination of potential witnesses. The systematic nature of this corruption revealed institutional failures that extended far beyond the immediate family members, demonstrating how criminal organizations could exploit weaknesses in law enforcement and judicial systems. The recovery of personal belongings from 24 different victims provided investigators with tangible connections to families who had spent years searching for missing relatives. Wedding rings, family photographs, distinctive jewelry, and other personal items were catalogued and returned to surviving relatives, bringing closure to families while providing additional evidence of the systematic nature of the crimes. The most disturbing discoveries came from the analysis of Merce's experimental notes, which revealed that she had used victims as test subjects for various medical procedures and poisoning techniques. Her detailed observations about the effectiveness of different treatments and the physiological responses of various victim types demonstrated a level of scientific detachment that horrified even experienced investigators who had dealt with numerous violent crimes. The testimony of surviving witnesses, including Annie Fletcher and several family members of victims, provided crucial evidence about the Crenshaw family's methods and the systematic nature of their operations. These accounts revealed how the family had perfected techniques for identifying vulnerable travelers, gaining their trust through religious hospitality, and gradually incapacitating them through careful poisoning before proceeding with robbery and murder. The physical evidence recovered from the underground chambers constructed by Benjamin provided concrete proof of the sophisticated infrastructure that had enabled the family's operations. The specialized drainage systems, chemical storage areas, and victim processing facilities demonstrated a level of planning and investment that could only have been justified by extensive criminal activity conducted over many years. The investigation also uncovered evidence of the family's systematic approach to witness elimination, including correspondence related to the murders of Margaret Whitfield, Daniel Harmon, and at least 5 other individuals who had survived initial contact with the Crenshaw family but were later killed to prevent them from sharing their suspicions with authorities. This pattern of witness elimination revealed the calculated nature of the family's approach to maintaining operational security. The reconstruction of the family's victim selection criteria, based on evidence from Merce's ledger and witness testimony, revealed the systematic manner in which they had identified and targeted vulnerable individuals. Their preference for travelers with no local connections, substantial cash resources, and flexible itineraries demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how to minimize the risk of investigation while maximizing the potential profits from each operation. The forensic analysis of the burial sites provided crucial evidence about the family's disposal methods and the systematic manner in which they had attempted to eliminate evidence of their crimes. The use of lime treatments, strategic placement of remains, and careful documentation of burial locations revealed a level of organization and planning that confirmed the premeditated nature of their activities. The final phase of evidence compilation included detailed financial analysis that traced the disposal of stolen goods through the criminal network that had supported the Crenshaw operations. This investigation revealed how items taken from victims had been systematically sold through corrupt merchants and fence operations, generating additional profits while creating a paper trail that ultimately provided evidence of the conspiracy's scope. The documentation of institutional corruption that had enabled the Crenshaw crimes included evidence of payments to Sheriff Dockery, arrangements with corrupt court officials, and coordination with criminal associates in multiple states. This evidence revealed how the family had systematically corrupted local institutions while building a support network that protected their operations from investigation and prosecution. The investigation's findings were compiled into a comprehensive report that detailed every aspect of the Crenshaw operations, from their initial establishment in the community through their final capture and the recovery of evidence. This document would serve as the foundation for one of the most significant criminal prosecutions in American legal history, while providing a detailed case study of how systematic criminal enterprises could operate undetected within respected community institutions. The evidence against the Crenshaw family was so overwhelming and comprehensive that their legal representatives began exploring plea bargain arrangements that might spare them from execution while ensuring their permanent incarceration. However, the systematic nature of their crimes and the substantial evidence of torture and experimentation made it unlikely that prosecutors would accept any arrangement that did not result in the ultimate penalty for their unprecedented criminal activities. The trial of the Crenshaw family commenced on September 14, 1909, in the federal courthouse at Lexington, Kentucky, drawing unprecedented attention from newspapers throughout the region and establishing legal precedents that would influence criminal prosecution for decades to come. The complexity of the case, involving 24 murders committed over 18 years along with extensive conspiracy charges, required innovative approaches to presenting evidence and testimony that challenged the existing capabilities of the American judicial system. Federal prosecutor William Harrison faced the enormous challenge of presenting a coherent narrative that could help jurors comprehend the systematic nature of crimes that defied normal human understanding. The sheer volume of evidence, including hundreds of physical exhibits and dozens of witness testimonies, threatened to overwhelm the proceedings while potentially obscuring the clear pattern of premeditated murder that characterized the Crenshaw operations. The prosecution's strategy focused on using Mercer's meticulously maintained ledger as the backbone for presenting the evidence, with each documented murder supported by corresponding physical evidence, witness testimony, and financial records. This systematic approach allowed Harrison to demonstrate the calculated nature of the crimes while providing jurors with a framework for understanding the scope and sophistication of the family's criminal enterprise. The first phase of testimony established the family's integration into the community and their use of religious authority and medical expertise to gain access to vulnerable victims. Witnesses described how the Crenshaws had carefully constructed reputations for charity and Christian service while systematically identifying and targeting individuals who could be eliminated without triggering immediate investigations or attracting unwanted attention from law enforcement agencies. The presentation of physical evidence proved to be one of the most challenging aspects of the trial, as the recovery of personal belongings from 24 different victims required careful documentation and identification procedures that consumed weeks of court time. The emotional impact on surviving family members, who were required to identify items belonging to their deceased relatives, created heart-wrenching scenes that demonstrated the human cost of the Crenshaw crimes. Annie Fletcher's testimony provided the crucial insider perspective that allowed jurors to understand how the family's operations had functioned on a day-to-day basis. Her detailed descriptions of the underground chambers, victim processing procedures, and systematic disposal methods gave the court concrete evidence of the infrastructure that had enabled 18 years of undetected murder. The defense strategy, led by prominent criminal attorney Marcus Caldwell from Louisville, attempted to portray the family members as victims of Ezekiel's psychological manipulation and religious fanaticism. This approach required admitting to participation in criminal activities while claiming that the other family members had been coerced into compliance through fear, indoctrination, and threats of violence. However, the extensive evidence of individual initiative and specialized expertise demonstrated by each family member made it impossible to sustain claims of unwilling participation. Benjamin's sophisticated construction projects, Merce's experimental medical procedures, and the twins' intelligence-gathering activities all revealed voluntary commitment to the criminal enterprise that contradicted assertions of coercion. The testimony regarding the family's systematic approach to witness elimination proved particularly damaging to their defense, as it demonstrated ongoing criminal activity that extended far beyond the immediate murders committed at their farm. The evidence of coordinated assassinations carried out in multiple states revealed a level of criminal sophistication that required voluntary participation from all family members. The financial evidence presented during the trial exposed the substantial profits that had motivated the Crenshaw operations, with detailed accounting of stolen goods, victim assets, and criminal proceeds that totaled over $6,000 in recovered value. This evidence demonstrated that the murders had been systematically planned and executed for financial gain rather than resulting from psychological compulsion or religious delusion. The most disturbing phase of the trial involved the presentation of Merce's experimental notes and the forensic evidence of torture and medical experimentation conducted on victims before their deaths. This testimony revealed sadistic aspects of the crimes that went far beyond simple robbery and murder, demonstrating a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even experienced court personnel. The prosecution's case was further strengthened by evidence of the criminal network that had supported the Crenshaw operations, including testimony from reformed criminal associates who provided details about the corruption and conspiracy that had enabled 18 years of undetected criminal activity. This evidence revealed how systematic corruption of local institutions had created an environment where such crimes could flourish. The defense's attempts to introduce mitigating evidence about the family's charitable activities and community service were systematically undermined by prosecution evidence demonstrating that these activities had been carefully calculated to provide cover for their criminal operations. The family's reputation for religious devotion and medical service was revealed to be nothing more than an elaborate facade designed to facilitate victim identification and selection. The jury deliberations lasted only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against all family members, reflecting the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the systematic manner in which the prosecution had presented their case. The speed of the deliberation suggested that jurors had found the evidence of premeditation and systematic criminal activity to be conclusive and irrefutable. The sentencing phase of the trial provided an opportunity for surviving family members of victims to address the court about the impact of the Crenshaw crimes on their lives and communities. These emotional testimonies revealed how the murders had destroyed entire family lines while creating lasting trauma for survivors who had spent years searching for missing relatives. Judge Samuel Morrison's sentencing remarks acknowledged the unprecedented nature of the crimes while emphasizing the need for justice that would both punish the perpetrators and deter future similar criminal enterprises. His decision to impose death sentences on Ezekiel, Mercy, and Benjamin while sentencing Sarah and Ruth to life imprisonment reflected the court's assessment of individual culpability and the systematic nature of their participation. The broader implications of the Crenshaw case extended far beyond the immediate family members, as the investigation had exposed institutional failures and systematic corruption that had enabled their operations. The trial results prompted reforms in law enforcement procedures, interagency communication protocols, and oversight mechanisms designed to prevent similar criminal enterprises from operating undetected. The unraveling of the criminal network that had supported the Crenshaw operations continued for months after the trial, with additional arrests and prosecutions of corrupt officials and criminal associates throughout the region. These subsequent cases revealed the true scope of the conspiracy while demonstrating how organized criminal activity could corrupt entire institutional systems when allowed to operate without effective oversight or accountability. The executions of Ezekiel, Mercy, and Benjamin Crenshaw took place on March 17, 1910, at the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville, marking the end of one of the most systematic killing sprees in American criminal history. The three family members maintained their silence until the end, refusing to provide any final confessions or expressions of remorse that might have brought additional closure to the families of their 24 documented victims. The aftermath of the Crenshaw case extended far beyond the punishment of the immediate perpetrators, triggering comprehensive reforms in law enforcement practices throughout Kentucky and neighboring states. The systematic corruption that had enabled 18 years of undetected murder prompted legislative action designed to strengthen oversight mechanisms and improve communication between different jurisdictional authorities. Sheriff Marcus Thornton, whose honest investigation had finally brought the family to justice, was appointed to head a new regional law enforcement coordination office that would prevent future cases from falling through jurisdictional cracks. His innovative approaches to interagency cooperation and evidence sharing became models for similar programs throughout the United States, establishing standards that would influence criminal investigation procedures for decades. The Crenshaw property was seized by federal authorities and eventually sold at public auction, with the proceeds used to establish a victim compensation fund for surviving family members of those who had been murdered. The farmhouse and outbuildings were demolished by court order to prevent them from becoming macabre tourist attractions that might dishonor the memory of the victims who had suffered and died there. The broader criminal network that had supported the Crenshaw operations was systematically dismantled through follow-up investigations that resulted in dozens of additional arrests and prosecutions. The exposure of corruption within local government institutions prompted comprehensive reforms in election procedures, financial oversight, and accountability mechanisms designed to prevent similar institutional failures in the future. Sarah and Ruth Crenshaw began serving their life sentences at the Kentucky Women's Reformatory, where they were kept in isolation to prevent them from influencing other inmates with a disturbing worldview that had been instilled during their upbringing. Prison records indicate that both women struggled throughout their incarceration to understand the moral significance of their actions, suggesting that their childhood indoctrination had created permanent psychological damage. The case established important legal precedents regarding conspiracy charges, interstate criminal enterprises, and the prosecution of systematic murder operations that would influence American jurisprudence for generations. Legal scholars studied the Crenshaw proceedings as examples of how complex criminal cases could be effectively prosecuted while ensuring that constitutional protections for defendants were properly maintained. The community of Harlan County struggled for years to come to terms with the revelation that their most respected religious family had been responsible for decades of systematic murder. The psychological impact on residents who had trusted and admired the Crenshaws created lasting trauma that affected community relationships and trust in authority figures for generations. The investigation's exposure of how easily criminal enterprises could exploit religious authority and medical expertise led to new oversight requirements for clergy and healthcare providers operating in rural communities. These reforms included background verification procedures, professional licensing requirements, and reporting mechanisms designed to identify suspicious patterns of activity before they could result in criminal exploitation. The detailed documentation left by Mercy Crenshaw became an invaluable resource for criminal investigators and behavioral specialists studying the psychology of systematic murder. Her clinical approach to recording victim characteristics and treatment effectiveness provided unprecedented insights into how organized criminal families could operate while maintaining facades of respectability and community service. Federal Marshal Crawford's innovative investigation techniques, including coordinated evidence collection, systematic witness protection, and interagency cooperation, became standard training materials for law enforcement agencies throughout the country. His methodical approach to building comprehensive cases against complex criminal organizations influenced investigation procedures that are still used by modern law enforcement. The financial investigation that revealed the true scope of the Crenshaw profits led to new requirements for monitoring unusual wealth accumulation in rural communities, particularly when such prosperity could not be adequately explained through legitimate income sources. These oversight mechanisms help prevent similar criminal enterprises from operating undetected for extended periods. The 24 confirmed victims of the Crenshaw family represented only the documented cases that investigators could prove through physical evidence and witness testimony. The systematic nature of their operations and the 18-year timeframe strongly suggested that additional murders had been committed but could not be conclusively proven due to the passage of time and the family's sophisticated evidence destruction procedures. Memorial services for the identified victims were held throughout the region, providing opportunities for surviving family members to finally achieve closure after years of uncertainty about the fate of their missing relatives. These ceremonies honored the memory of innocent people who had been targeted specifically because of their vulnerability and isolation from protective community connections. The psychological profiles developed during the investigation revealed how the Crenshaw family had systematically normalized violence and dehumanized their victims through religious justification and financial motivation. These insights contributed to early understanding of how criminal organizations could indoctrinate children and maintain operational security through psychological manipulation and shared complicity. What do you think about this chilling tale of systematic evil hiding behind religious respectability? How many other criminal families might have operated throughout history without ever being discovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what other dark chapters of American history you'd like us to investigate. If you've made it through this entire disturbing journey with us, you're truly part of our community of people who believe these stories need to be told. Subscribe and hit that notification bell to join others who refuse to let history's victims be forgotten. The legacy of the Crenshaw case continues to influence criminal investigation procedures, community oversight mechanisms, and public awareness about how systematic predators can exploit positions of trust and authority. The detailed documentation of their methods serves as a permanent reminder of the importance of maintaining vigilance against those who would use respectability as camouflage for unthinkable crimes. The rural cemetery where the identified victims were finally laid to rest with dignity became a place of remembrance for all those who had suffered at the hands of the Crenshaw family. The memorial established there serves as a lasting testament to the importance of seeking justice for the innocent and maintaining the moral courage necessary to confront evil regardless of its disguise or social position.